Good morning and welcome to the STARS 25th anniversary celebration. My name is Sandy Chang, Associate Dean of STEM Education at Yale College and Director of the STARS program. I will be moderating today's sessions. We gather to celebrate STARS for the first time since its inception. By any measure, STARS has been extraordinarily successful. Women and underrepresented students who participated in STARS are significantly more likely to persist in STEM majors and to pursue STEM disciplines after graduation. We will hear from some of these extraordinary STARS alums today. Students who will also get to meet them in Zoom breakout sessions later on. We will also hear from some of the leaders who made the STARS program possible. Many of these individuals continue to serve this program today, a testament to their dedication to make Yale STEM more inclusive and equitable. President Peter Salovey, the Chris Argyris Professor of Psychology, will lead off the program with a short video.
Hello, I'm Peter Salovey, President of Yale University. Thank you for inviting me to join you to celebrate the 25th anniversary of STARS. A quarter century ago, Professor Kurt Zellm and University Secretary and Vice President for University Life Kim Goff Cruz recognized the need for a program like this. Thanks to their vision, hundreds of Yale students have gained firsthand research experience and support for navigating their majors and building careers. Women and others from underrepresented groups in science have received the mentorship and opportunities we know are essential for success in STEM fields. I also want to express my appreciation to Dean Sandy Chang for leading STARS with such enthusiasm and dedication. Many faculty members have been critical partners in this work. They've taught courses and served as role models. Research shows that role models play a powerful role, particularly for students who come from backgrounds that aren't well represented in sciences. Accomplished educators and researchers at Yale like Dean Chang, Dean Marvin Chun, Professor Zellm, and Professor Maguri have inspired students through this program. The rewards have been great. STARS alumni have gone on to build careers and make contributions to science, technology, and medicine. At Yale, welcoming students and scholars from diverse backgrounds is a university-wide priority. We know diversity is integral to excellence, fueling discovery and answering our most urgent questions. As you know, based on engagement from every part of our community, I launched programs that are part of the next phase of the Belonging at Yale initiative. These programs delve into our history, assess and build on our current actions, support members of the university community, and create a stronger Yale for the future. They help us to continue to lead the way in teaching and research of the highest caliber. As we collaborate on this vital work, it is especially important to foster a sense of belonging and inclusion in STEM. We've made progress in increasing representation from diverse groups in these fields, but there is more to do. We know that our students today are the leaders and the mentors of tomorrow. And so programs like STARS are essential to fulfilling Yale's mission to improve the world today and for future generations. Thank you to everyone who has made this program such a success. And congratulations on this wonderful milestone. I look forward to the next 25 years of STARS at Yale.
Thank you very much, President Salovey. Our next speaker is Marvin Chung, Dean of Yale College, the Richard M. Colgate Professor of Psychology and Professor of Neuroscience. Dean Chung.
Good morning, everyone. It's such an exciting day to be here for the 25th anniversary of STARS. It is absolutely a top priority for Yale College. And as a scientist leading a brain imaging lab, I'm showing our brain scanner behind me. It's a program that's very dear to my heart. As you just heard, STARS really exemplifies President Salovey's mission for Yale to be the research university most committed to teaching and learning. And we're also, really grateful to University Secretary and Vice President for Student Life, Kim Goff Cruz, who not only, who leads our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives. That is a major priority for Yale. I really celebrate her for founding this STARS program, along with Professor Zellm and Professor Kenneth Nelson. And I also, I'm grateful for this opportunity to thank and to recognize Dr. Sandy Chang, Professor Sandy Chang. He is truly passionate and tireless in his leadership of STARS. He thinks about STARS all the time, and you really cannot ask for a better colleague, a better Associate Dean of Science and Quantitative Reasoning Education. As an accomplished MD, PhD clinician and scientist himself, and as a Yale alum, a Yale College alum, I think he really embodies what we're trying to achieve with this program. Even as he says one of his motivations for leading this program is that he did not get to benefit from something like this himself. I really also want to thank our fabulous colleagues and faculty for teaching in this program and for mentoring students in your labs. You are the engine that really make this possible and make it successful. And of course, I applaud the students, many of you who are here as alumni, again, serving as role models. But it's really your engagement with the program, you're giving your best is what allows us, which has kept this program strong for 25 years. In this program, you've demonstrated dedication, persistence, and resilience. Science is hard. It has a lot of setbacks, but your ability to overcome these challenges, bad data, hard, long days, it's what you've demonstrated in the labs that again has made this program so successful. And I'm, nothing makes me happier than to see our students thrive through this program and to have good rewards after graduation, good careers after graduation, based on the experiences that you've gained through STARS. And so as Dean, I'm grateful for this opportunity to thank you all. And I want to just close by saying that it's absolutely a top goal for me to expand this program so that every student who wants to participate can benefit from it. And so I really hope even as soon as the 30th anniversary and ideally even sooner, I or my successor will be able to say that this program is fully funded. But today, I look forward to celebrating this milestone with you all, and I thank you all for being here. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Dean Chung, and thank you for your continued support for Yale STEM. Our next speaker is Kim Goff Cruz, the Secretary and Vice President for University Life. Secretary Cruz.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. First of all, I am so excited to be here, and I'm honored to be here to celebrate with you this milestone in STARS history. I, as people mentioned, was there at the very, very beginning, and am surprised and grateful that it has lasted as long as it has. I wasn't sure that it would. Professor Zellm and I were part of a small team of, and Dr. Nelson also, a small team of faculty and staff that were looking to create a program, particularly for students of color and women, that would ensure that they could persist in the sciences. And it's interesting because it succeeded a program that was called AMPS. It was called the Academic Mentoring Program in the Sciences. That wasn't really working as well. So we took a year off to actually figure out what we wanted to do. And most people don't know this, that before STARS, there was nothing. It was a year of nothing. And then we actually went on a little bit of a tour and doing some research around the country to figure out what we might do differently. And with that wonderful team of Ken Nelson, Dr. Zellm, Iona Black came in just at the right time. and Kalis came in a little later, we began to, I would say actually the faculty began to develop a program that they thought was really worthy of the students that they wanted to provide service for. They had 4 main themes that they were really focusing on as they were building the program. One is we were all focused on following the students, particularly that initial student group, what their needs were. And so STARS 1 was the first iteration of STARS, then STARS Summer, because the students were going to go into the summer program, then STARS 2, because then the students were becoming sophomores and juniors. So we followed the students. We were very focusing on the whole student and not just their academic work. And we were very focused on having very high expectations, but also creating community and not competition. And so you'll see those themes, I think, have really gone through STARS for the last 25 years with this wonderful group of faculty and staff who have nurtured it over the years as well. I am grateful to those initial students who allowed us to work so closely with them, and to Kalis and Tori, and particularly to Dr. Black as well, who passed last summer, but who was such a guiding light as a wonderful mentor for the students over the years. I know she, wherever she is pleased to see that this program is thriving, to see the work that her students that she worked with are doing, and to see that all of you have continued to do and participate in a program that is thriving. So again, thank you. Congratulations to all STARS, to the administrators who have followed, and to the wonderful work that we see coming out of the program itself. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Secretary Goff Cruz, and thank you for founding STARS. Our next speaker is Kurt Zellm, the William K. Lamon Jr. Professor of Chemistry and Chair of the Department of Chemistry at Yale. Professor Zellm.
Thank you, Sandy. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's hard to believe 25 years. I would have never thought starting with AMPS, and I've got to mention one name I haven't heard is Bob Wyman, professor of MCDB, who I think really was the founder. I've been given credit for a lot of things that Bob Wyman started. Especially when this became an HHMI program, and then we've ever since, through many rounds of funding, when this was innovative, across the country, we were copied. It was the most sincere form of flattery by other universities copying what was done in STARS. But after about 15 years or so, 10 or 15 years, funding agencies started to say, well, this isn't innovative anymore. This is just something you should do. We don't need to provide seed funding anymore. And so it's been my goal has been to push the institution to find a way to endow this program and to fully fund it. And it is so fulfilling to hear first from it was at the time was Dean Holloway and now Dean Chun, and to hear in the Yale Science Priorities that this is an institutional priority and it's not a question of if but when. And I hope you're all able to participate and help us in this goal of making certain this program is funded and can be expanded for future generations of Yale students. I wish you were all here. So much has changed since you were on campus, many of you. There has been an enormous amount of building that's going on. I'm speaking to you with a background from my renovated office in Sterling Chemistry, and I'm very proud of my labs that are in Sterling Chemistry. But the spaces that you were probably most familiar with, where maybe you took a class in SCL 160, which is about half again bigger than it was, with demonstration hoods. The old teaching labs that you had with the wooden sashes have been replaced by an amazing new teaching facility where every student in organic chemistry gets their own hood to use. It's just an amazing, brilliant facility that just showcases Yale's commitment to STEM. There's a new research building. That's actually Sterling. There's a new research building for chemistry, and there is now a new biology building that's replaced Gibbs. which is amazing. So I really wish we were on campus. I hope we have an on-campus one, so that you all get a chance to see the facilities that STARS students are able to work in now. And I'm very excited to hear about in the breakout sessions what you've all been up to, and to catch up and hopefully be able to engage you to help future STARS students and Yale as we try to fully fund this program. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Zellm. Our first STARS alumni speaker is Carissa Sanchez, the facility administrator at the Vita Dialysis Clinic. Clarissa.
Hi, can everyone hear me all right? All right, sounds good. Thank you so much for having me with you guys this morning. I'm very excited to be here. I was a mechanical engineering major and graduated from Yale in 2015, and then went on to really just do actual engineering work. So I worked with Alcoa. We were doing a lot of aerospace manufacturing for jet engine components, and got a lot of my exposure there. I came in through the STARS summer program, and maybe like a lot of other first generation URM students, I honestly had no idea what I wanted to study. And yeah, very much joined STARS and very luckily matched with the Schroer's Material Science and Mechanical Engineering Lab. And was really grateful for the mentorship, especially of Kyla, who I see on today. And yeah, I was able to find out that I really enjoyed the research. I also kind of serendipitously found that there was a very strong connection with these materials that we were developing that could be used for healthcare applications. And I ended up staying with that same lab I found during my STARS summer for all 4 years of undergrad, and was able to help a PhD student develop these diabetes blood glucose sensors out of the materials we were developing. And that kind of spurred the rest of my career, honestly, because I had this light bulb moment where I realized that I'm from the Tohono Nation, and my tribe has the highest rate of diabetes per any people group across the world. So over 50% of the tribe has diabetes by the time they're 25 years old. And it just STARS, curriculum and being able to go through that just really lit a fire under me to be able to have a good career within STEM, but also to do something good for my people and underrepresented communities. So going through my actual engineering job, it was fun. I was learning a lot. I also wanted to do more, and get back to doing something that would impact my people. So I went to business school, a little off the beaten path for typical STEM engineering students, and wound up kind of serendipitously finding the Vita, who provides a lot of dialysis care, and they're also on the innovation front of how do we address things like diabetes and just general chronic kidney disease from a big healthcare scale, and not just what a doctor or a nurse is doing every single day with the patients. So I joined the DaVita program after my MBA, after spending a summer with BCG and kind of getting additional healthcare contacts there. And yeah, it's been a whirlwind. I graduated from business school in a little bit about a year ago, so May 2020. And it's been a fascinating time to be in a dialysis clinic during COVID. When we were short-staffed or when things were going crazy, I was the person who was running out to the parking lot and giving patients COVID tests. So got a lot of good exposure there, and it's been really heartwarming to see that the path from a rural public school to Yale through STARS, through a business school program has led me to be able to have a strong impact. Where if I have a Navajo patient who can't figure out how to apply for Medicare, I can help with that, and it's very rewarding to be able to do that. So I want to encourage the whole class here and more recent alumni that your path may be winding. I know we come into Yale thinking like, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a psychologist, I'm going to be an engineer. The world throws different things your way, so be okay with that. It's not the end of the world if plan A doesn't go exactly how it was supposed to. Certainly for me, I had no idea that I would wind up in kidney care, working directly with Native American populations, which is very much the dream, but wasn't expected. I would also like to encourage you guys to just take up space. I think during my time at Yale, I very much just like put my head down. I think kind of on a stereotypical front, minorities are trained to, be quiet, just like get through it, do well, but not raise a ruckus. I think so much of my success was linked to having close relationships with, the professors and the PhD students and different mentors who were really invested in our success and, of course, said, like, you're welcome to pop by any time. But what that means is you will be so much better off and have a much easier go of this if you, take up that office hour space, if you go have one-on-ones and build those relationships. So, all of us here speaking on this panel today are very invested in current student success. So please reach out to any of us. I'm very open to that, very excited to pave a way for you guys to do even better than we've done. So thanks for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Carissa, for those sagely advice. Our next speaker is Courtney Williams, Senior Staff Scientist, Oncology and Angiogenesis Department at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. Courtney?
Thanks so much, Dean Chang. I'm hoping you all can see my slides. My name's Courtney Williams. I am class of '01. This is my 20th reunion year. And I am glad Carissa went right before me because I think it is important to remember that your path can be a winding one, even though mine was not. So I did go kind of straight shot from undergrad to grad school to a postdoc to a job. And some of that was kind of financial, not wanting to have my loans come out of deferment and things like that. But I think as the first two speakers were examples that the paths can differ and you can still get to where you want to go. So I've got some old pictures here for everybody. So I was at Yale from, sorry, I'm just going to have a pointer so I can point people out. From 1997 to 2001, I majored in MB&B and I was able to participate in STARS 1, STARS Summer, and STARS 2. All of that thanks to Dr. Iona Black, who you heard mentioned earlier and who's right here, who saw me in her chemistry class and just for whatever reason decided that I was going to be in her program and she was going to make sure that happened. And it allowed me to get into a lab. I worked with Dr. Joanne Sweezey, who was part of the larger graduate school faculty, but her lab was in the Department of Therapeutic Radiology at the Yale School of Medicine. She's since moved her lab recently to Arizona. But there I worked on polymerase beta interacting proteins during DNA mismatch repair in mammalian meiosis. And just to give you an idea, these are some of my friends from STARS, now a doctor, now a physician's assistant, now doing research. Jacqueline is in your program. She and I were there at the same time. Some of you might remember Dean George. So lots of folks went on to successful careers in science and law and lots of other things. But when I finished up at Yale, I considered staying there for grad school, but felt like I kind of needed to leave the nest. And so I went to Princeton, where I was in the Department of Molecular Biology, and it was a relatively small program at the time. It's since grown tremendously since I've been there. I was in the lab of Dr. Jean Schwartzbauer, and I've just put some of my publications here just so students can get an idea of the kind of work that I did in these various labs. But my project was looking at breast cancer and the role of the extracellular matrix protein fibronectin in breast cancer initiation and progression. And I used a 3D culture system that was pretty cumbersome and not the best way to look at these problems and ask these kinds of questions about the role of matrix and stiffness in breast cancer progression. And at a conference that I went to, a senior scientist suggested to think of your career at like a toolbox. And what are the questions you want to ask, and what tools do you need in that toolbox? And then pick your next steps based on how to get those tools. And so I took that advice to heart, and I realized that I knew a lot about the biology, but I didn't know a lot about the engineering that it would take to design systems that I really needed to ask the kind of questions that I wanted to ask. So from there, I went to MIT for my postdoc in the lab of Dr. Linda Griffith in the Department of Biological Engineering. And some people do know her. She's a MacArthur Genius Grant winner. But if you've ever seen the picture of the nude mouse with a human ear growing on its back, that was her postdoctoral research that produced that. And so in her lab there at MIT, I basically was able to up my engineering game and work on designing culture systems to help maintain the function of primary hepatocytes, which is important for drug testing, because if these cells don't maintain their differentiation, then you can't look at toxicity because you don't know if drugs are being properly metabolized. But so I worked with a team of material scientists and other engineers to come up with 2 different systems for culturing these primary hepatocytes to get them to maintain that function. And when I went looking for a job, I had previously seen information about Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, and it was near where I grew up. I grew up in the Hudson Valley in New York State. And it turns out my cousin's wife's best friend from high school worked at Regeneron, and I found that out through LinkedIn. And that connection, I talked with her. My cousin put me in touch, and she sent my CV on to the HR department at Regeneron. And it turned out that they were looking for someone to design in vitro cell culture systems to complement their in vivo tumor work. And basically, I was kind of the perfect candidate for that, because I came from a background of, instead of, one culture system is the solution for all engineering needs, I approached it from a much more like, what signals do you need? This is how we can ask those questions. And so I've been there for 10 years. And I started as a scientist, and I've studied a bunch of different things, as well as doing a lot of STEM outreach. These are some of my publications here, and I can talk more about that in the breakout group, because I don't want to go over time, and I definitely want time for this slide. So this is the t-shirt that I still have with our logo from the STARS Summer in 1999. That is me, and that is my friend Lauren, who's now a doctor. And some more pictures of, we've got, a marine biologist, we've got some lawyers, there's Dr. Black, researcher, wealth capital. I looked up some folks last night, wealth capital person, doctor at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So a lot of people went on to do a lot of successful stuff. We've got like people in education, plenty of doctors. I still run into STARS people working in the various areas of the life sciences. But it's definitely been, STARS was instrumental into helping me stay in science and be successful in science. And I really owe that all to Dr. Black, who was leading STARS when I was an undergraduate, and kind of saw something in me and decided to really, despite my resistance to joining STARS, really decided to make sure I got in the program. And she really was a champion for me as an undergraduate, and the program that STARS was with Dr. Nelson was really instrumental into my success as an undergrad, and leaving me very well prepared for graduate school. So with that, I am finished, a little over time, but I look forward to talking to students in the breakout groups. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Courtney. Our next speaker is Thomas Howard, a current medical student at the Harvard MIT MD PhD program. Thomas?
Thank you, Sandy. I hope everyone can see my slides here. I wanted to speak briefly today about some of my experiences as a first-generation college student, and in particular, how in medical school, it really felt like all of my classmates had physicians for parents. And now this wasn't quite true, of course, but there definitely seemed to be this wealth of knowledge that many of my classmates had that wasn't taught in our classrooms and weren't in any of our books. And of one of the many examples of this on my very first rotation coming back from my PhD years was surgery. And the intern handed me a copy of the patient list that might have looked something like this. And it's mostly a list of tasks that need to get done. And as the medical student, you're trying to be helpful. You're trying to get some of these done for the residents. And as you can see, so much of medicine is all of this shorthand and acronyms to try to figure out what's going on with each of these patients. And fortunately, I knew many of this. But there was one acronym that was popping up all over the place, NTD, and I had no idea what that meant. I was racking my brain to try to figure out what test or antibiotic or whatever this might mean. And when I failed at that, I did what every good medical student does, which is consult Dr. Google. But every place that I looked, the only thing I saw for NTD was a neural tube defect, which is something that can happen in the developing fetus, and certainly was not the medical abbreviation that I was looking for. So I sheepishly asked the intern, I said, "I'm so sorry if I should know this, but could you please tell me what NTD means?" And then that's when she said, "It just means nothing to do." It wasn't a medical abbreviation at all. It was just a shorthand on that list of tasks. Now, when I think back at what has been 13 years of higher education, I really appreciate the fact that I had a chance as part of the STARS summer program to learn many of these things. And so that's both the programming that recognizes that not all of us come in with the same background and the same information, but then more importantly, connecting us with mentors who can try to help us navigate those waters. At that point, I had no idea what graduate school was or what one might do with a PhD or what being a PI might be like. And I'm so thankful for Steve and Maria, who welcomed me into their lab and taught me all of these things, and then put me on the road to applying for MD PhD programs after Yale. I was also very fortunate to have great PhD mentors at Harvard, and particularly people who could model what it was like to care for patients as well as to run a lab. And now I think many of you guys have already experiencing that as soon as you learn information, you can start passing that on to others as well. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of my time in those labs is that I recruited and was able to mentor an undergrad, Melinda, and a research technician, Taylor, who were both phenomenal and so helpful for our work. And we had all of these people contribute, many of them who were postdocs or professors themselves. And it was Melinda and Taylor who we were able to give the most credit for as part of this team effort. And what I'm most proud of is we were also able to help them, even in just little ways, to get them into medical school themselves. And they're going to move on with their dreams to become doctors as well. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that the greatest gift I got from Yale was meeting my now wife, Tara. We got annexed from our college's junior year to Arnold Hall. I'm not sure if that's something that still happens, but if that's an experience you're having, there might be some unexpected positives that come from it. So thank you all for listening. I'm so excited that I'll be able to talk with some of you later on, and I'm very happy to reach out by email or anything that I can be helpful with in the future.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Our next speaker is Aydah Bermard, who is a current graduate student and NSF fellow. Aydah?
Yeah, sure. Right, my name is Aydah Bermard. I graduated from Yale in 2015 with a BS in physics, and I was a STARS 2 student, and I'm currently a grad student in planetary science at Caltech. So my current research is focused on exoplanets, which is basically exactly what they sound like. They're planets that exist outside the solar system, orbiting stars other than the sun. So these days I'm working on projects to try and tease out possible correlations between the chemical compositions of the stars that host these exoplanets and the types of the planets themselves. So one example of this could be, does a star rich in rocky elements like iron or magnesium tend to host planetary systems of a certain type, like say, maybe close-in gas giants, or rather smaller multi-planet systems? And figuring out these sorts of correlations can tell us more about the chemical histories of planets outside our solar system, which I find super fascinating because I think of other planets as not just things, but other places that we can learn more about and maybe travel to one day and maybe amenable to hosting life. So I'm super grateful for the start I got in science research at Yale, a large part of which was participation in the STARS program, which allowed me to conduct research in the astro department and also gave me access to a community of scientists who are working on really cool research that was very different from my own, which is always nice to hear about. And the mentorship I received as a STARS student was also super helpful for me. I was able to build close relationships with postdocs and other senior scientists at Yale who also were women of color and who were honest with me about challenges that I may face in grad school and encouraged me that I would be able to do it anyway. So these days when I'm not working on science, I spend a lot of time on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at Caltech. I currently serve as the diversity chair on the grad student council, and we do everything that we can to support and advocate for Caltech grads with marginalized identities. I'm also really passionate about science education and outreach, and I've been going into Pasadena elementary schools as part of a grad student team to teach biweekly science classes for the better part of the last 4 years. I honestly didn't think I would spend so much time on outreach and DEI initiatives when I got to Caltech, but it turns out that Caltech, while an exceptional institute for science and research, is not the most diverse place, which I think on some level can be said about any scientific community, especially once you climb past the undergrad level. So when I came and saw how it was, I really wanted to do everything to help that was in my power. So if you're interested in talking to me about any of that or my science or anything at all, I'd be super happy to do so later.
Thank you very much, Aydah. Our next speaker is Ben Bartolomi, who's a current data scientist at Navy Federal Credit Union. Ben?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Ben Bartolomi, class of 2016. Majored in chemical engineering, and I'm now a data scientist at a pretty big credit union. Before I start, I want to give a shout out to my my girl Mary, who's a current STARS 1 student. Super awesome, really incredible person, and I really look forward to chatting with as many of you as possible in the coming years. In terms of how STARS has impacted me in my journey, I want to give a few pretty material examples, but perhaps on the softer skill side, the ability to clearly communicate as perhaps better evidence than Courtney and Thomas's slides is really, really important. And you'll see some abysmal, truly abhorrent things as you go about your life. And so I'm going to give you an example. I just had this slide shown to me earlier this week at work. There were about 200 slides. This one stood out the most. And these were created by eccentric consultants who get paid 6 figures. And you don't have to know what any of this means. I don't know what any of this means. But someone sat down, they built this slide, and they thought, yeah, this is really the clearest way to communicate this information. This is abysmal. Who knows what's going on here? And then ironically, they have here in the middle some circle thing that says elicit and clarify. This is a joke. And so, this would not be Professor Moreno approved, I'm sure. But in terms of clear communication, this is the way to not do it. STARS will help you get on the right track and start your way off. Well, in terms of other things, and thankfully there's a breakout room on this later, which is awesome. But STARS also taught me how to be a really good mentee and also an improving mentor, which is to say that as a mentee and also as a mentor, but you throughout your journey with STARS, you get the opportunity to learn how to listen well, to give conversations like the space to breathe, how to enter conversations with like a humility and an open mind, asking thoughtful questions of the people that you're in dialogue with. And then, on either side of the interaction, the ability to for consistent follow-up. And this is the type of thing where, your mentor or advisor or whoever that you might be reaching out to, reaching out, it doesn't have to be like a kind of continuous thing. It can be, but even something as perhaps infrequent, in quotes, as a 6 months to a year, that type of thing. But it's super valuable. And it also emphasizes, in terms of this like mentor-mentee relationship, that there's like so many people, so many alums that want to help. I think right now in total, in terms of Yale alums, there's like 175,000 plus. The overwhelming majority of them do not get reached out to, and they would love to help. But like this is a way in which you can differentiate yourself, because there's a massive amount of wisdom that's available out there, right? And if you just reach out, there's a really high likelihood that they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'd love to chat with you," and you can have access to that. A really great example of that on my end is that, excuse me, I'm looking to start a company soon with some friends, and I needed some insight kind of on the legal side and in the financial sector. And so I reached out to this one alumna who was the formerly a commissioner of the Security and Exchange Commission under Obama. And I was like, "Hey, can I get your insight on this?" And she gave all kinds of really valuable insight. And it was just by my reaching out, and she was happy to help. And now she kind of continues to be an advisor to me in many ways. But all I had to do was ask. And so, yeah, this concept of being, a good mentee, and similarly on the mentor side, like you can develop these softer skills that are extraordinarily valuable as you go about your journey. And so, yeah, and then the last thing I want to chat about, and this is on a more personal level, similar to Thomas, is that I want to talk about something else that STARS provided was an avenue to meet my current wife. I met my wife, Brooke, over STARS summer. You can actually see that even though I graduated pretty recently, this camera quality was actually the best technology that was available those few years ago, which is kind of incredible. Science really does progress very quickly, and STARS contributes to that. So thank you. We were on the bus to the beach. Here you can see that we are on a boat. You can tell by our posturing that we were extremely popular, even though we're standing by ourselves. And you might be thinking, man, how did this guy come to sit before you and he's presenting in this panel? Well, a few years later, you can have a glow up just like this. Boom, we made it, baby. And so, yeah, Brooke and I got married a few months ago, August 2020. I don't know, we were as Mary put it, the first STARS cross lovers to get married. Hopefully we're not the last, but, have fun with it. It's a good time. STARS will, in many ways help set you up on the path, and a very fruitful one. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was terrific. Our next speaker is Clarence Agby, a senior data scientist at Brex. Clarence?
Hello, thanks for the introduction. My name is Clarence Agby, class of 2009, which is a while ago at this point. Majored in electrical engineering. I was part of Calhoun, now Grace Hopper College. And if you all remember nothing from this conversation or this talk, I absolutely want you to remember this one thing that, basically Carissa stole it already, is make your own lane, make your own path. And don't be afraid to pivot, right? And so one of the things that I'll, kind of talk about is my own path, my own journey through STEM, and how STARS played a role in that. For me, I'm originally from New York, so shout out to any New Yorkers on the call. Son of immigrants, shout out to all of you as well. Came to Yale, and I wasn't really sure what my path was going to be. I mean, I was into like AP math, AP science, and all of that, but I came to Yale just to give myself the option of like, what if I wanted to be an English major or an econ or a Spanish major? Because these were all things I was interested in. And I would say definitely Econ 115, is that the introductory course? It definitely crushed all of my hopes of that. I think I got a C in that class. Quickly learned English was not for me. Spanish, also not great for me, even though that summer after freshman year, I worked at a temp agency as part of Bulldogs in the Rockies, translating basically from English to Spanish job requirements and things like that. So you must be wondering like, well, why, what does this have to do with engineering? All of this is kind of like on the journey of things that failed for me, right? And ultimately I figured out sometime around sophomore year that I was really, really into engineering. And I think freshman year I took physics, but it wasn't until I took some of the hardcore engineering classes that I was like, oh yeah, this is really clicking for me. This is really making sense. And, in that time, during sophomore year, I think one class that really stood out for me was Professor Coots's class, EE 350. I don't even know if they still have that class, but Professor Coots essentially ran the digital, I think it's the acoustics lab. He was really into like bats and acoustics, but essentially it was all about robotics and how do you use systems to do very intelligent things. And in that class, he had us build like a differential drive robot, which I had never done before. I thought, wow, this is really cool. And that really piqued my interest and got me thinking about grad school. The summer after sophomore year, I ended up going to a program similar to STARS. It was NSF funded, but it was at Georgia Tech with predominantly, minority, Black and brown people, women. And it really made room for me to, one, do research at an institution, and two, just figure out how to get into grad school, because it was such an ambiguous process. And it just felt like a big barrier and a big hump. So did that. And I would say that program specifically, much like STARS 1 at Yale, really made me want to be a PhD student. I mean, I came back from my summer in Atlanta and I was like, research, where can I do more of it? And that's where, at that point, Dean George kind of intersected and was like, have you heard of STARS 2? And by the way, I should say a lot of the STARS 1 folks are very tight knit. Like I kind of have a little bit of FOMO about not doing that program, but I didn't want to be in New Haven not one moment longer during the summer, so I left. But when I came back, like I said, junior year, I put my head down and I talked to Professor Coots, and I was like, let's do some research together. And so I applied to STARS 2, was a STARS 2 student, and did research for about a year and a half. Which eventually turned into my senior project. In that year and a half, I learned a lot about ambiguity. I learned a lot about scoping projects. I lived at Becton Lab, and I trekked often to the AFAM house, where I did, I was a normal person, right? So I didn't just do research 24/7. I was part of like Yale Gospel Choir. I was part of Stepping Out. I saw people. I had to maintain a social life and be a real person. But on top of that, I was also really motivated to do research and to get into grad school and do all of these wonderful things. And I was really gung-ho about sticking on this path of like research, right? So, eventually things worked out. I ended up, like I said, it became my senior project. You can actually Google it. I think the YouTube link is out there. You can ask me about it later. And I got into, something that people won't often tell you is that some of these programs are a little bit of a crapshoot. So I got into 2 of the 8 graduate programs that I applied to. And I was lucky enough to get into Carnegie Mellon for my MS PhD program. So, don't feel bad if you don't get into all of the things that you want to do. My motto is to kind of fail forward and fail often, right? And like I said early, don't be afraid to pivot. So I went to CMU, did hardcore engineering there, actually did research in smart buildings as part of I was also an NSF graduate research fellow. So I was doing research in how do we make buildings smarter and build really fancy control systems to do that. I was writing proofs for days. And ultimately, after 5 years of doing that, I was pooped out. I couldn't go any further. So, hats off to you, Dr. Williams, and to all the other doctors that stayed on, and did research and became professors. I took a completely different route and was like, I'm going into industry. I became a software engineer at a defense company, and then eventually pivoted into this very brand new thing called data science. And at the time it was brand new. Now everybody is kind of like, oh yeah, data science, that's a thing. But I say all of this to say that in the process of me, getting to where I am now, where I feel like I'm in a job that completely suits all of my abilities, some of these things didn't exist at that time. And I think it's okay that it doesn't exist now. You might be built to do something that is completely brand new. You might not be built for, the traditional path, or you might not be built for the non-traditional path either. There's a lot of ambiguity and stress and imposter syndrome and all of that there as well. So, definitely feel free to go to all the breakout rooms, but definitely come to mine. If you want to talk a little bit more, I can speak to just about anything in that experience, right? From, Yale to grad school to what it's like now working in the engineering world, in tech, and where to go from there. Certainly my career is still taking pivots and I'm still making a path for myself. So I don't claim to have it all figured out, and I don't think any of the other speakers do, but certainly we can help you where you are now and, work together on the journey. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Clarence. Our next speaker is Rahul Navero, Assistant Professor of Chemistry at Occidental College. Rahul?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rahul Navero. I'm currently an assistant professor at Occidental College in Southern California. First off, I just wanted to say I'm really excited to see so many familiar faces. Clarence, Tina, some of my classmates, Dean Chun, who I knew as Master Chun of Berkeley College back then, Professor Zellm, who I didn't have the pleasure of taking a class with, but I remember your face very well, spending a lot of time in Sterling. So let's see, I guess I'll tell you a little bit about how I got involved with STARS and how it's led to where I am today. I mean, the sort of it is that it essentially molded the person I am today in a lot of ways. I started at Yale, I was born and raised in LA, the son of immigrant parents who had just come from Mexico, right? And, they kind of just came over here to give us all these opportunities. And so I took that very seriously as a kid, and I was lucky enough to get into Yale, thinking I was going to do pre-med. Everyone's kind of touched on this idea of these meandering paths, right? And so that was mine. I was definitely pre-med when I first started. I had a general vague sense of, I wanted to help people, but I don't think I really understood how then at the time. And then I tried the STARS program. My freshman year, I remember the end of my freshman year. It was this, I saw a flyer for it. I was like, well, med schools look for research experience. Let's give it a shot. And honestly, the rest is history. I had my first summer research experience. Dr. Black was the person who really helped me out there. I'm really indebted to her because I still remember the fact that it was like a few weeks before the summer started and I still hadn't picked out a lab, which apparently I was supposed to do. And so Dr. Black, of course, comes in and is, essentially holds my hand through the entire process, which I really needed at the time because I had no clue what I was doing. Helped me figure out a chemistry lab. I still remember the first day of my time there because it was such a crazy experience for me. I had never seen anything like it, right? Grad school to me was such a foreign thing. And I was there in that first day thinking like, wow, I was in a lab and just an amazement that I could do something like that and get paid for it. That to me was just such a crazy concept. And so, the rest is history. I enjoyed my time there. It was tough, learning a lot of the stuff you do as a researcher when you had just taken general chemistry. But I got a lot of great training in that first summer. I then took organic chemistry my second year, a class that I think a lot of people dread taking. And I certainly wasn't a big fan my first semester, but once I think I devoted more time to it and, went to office hours and got a lot of help for it, I became really good at it and really wanted to do research in it. And so then I approached my professor at the time, let me do research, who's no longer at Yale, but he graciously let me be in his lab. And that's when I really, I think, found the great intersection of, for me, the kind of research that I wanted to do where it kind of overlapped with a lot of my interests. So for me, it was kind of about building molecules. And that I thought was really cool. So I did that for the rest of my time at Yale. It was more or less 2 years that I was in Professor Glenn Michelizio's lab. And, the decision to apply to grad school for me wasn't necessarily a conscious one. Like I reached a point my junior year where I was thinking about grad schools without having sort of thought about the fact that I was no longer like a pre-med student and was actively thinking about like, I'm going to be in graduate school next. And so for me, it was kind of a decision was kind of made for me in that way. And so let's see, so after Yale, I also applied to grad school. Clarence mentioned, it's really grad school really is kind of a crapshoot. You'll get into places and you're going to think like, I got in here, but I didn't get in here. It's like, doesn't make any sense. But that's just how it goes, right? And so I was excited to get into Caltech. And so I went back to, and I was also kind of missing, being in California, I love Yale, but I didn't love the weather. This is the summary of my 4 years at Yale. So I came back to do my PhD at Caltech, where I did it in chemistry. And, my experience there, I'm happy to talk about it in the breakout sessions. I had a great time there. I got a chance to really dive into more organic chemistry research, thinking about making these, what we refer to as these, natural products, molecules you can isolate from nature that have some interesting biological properties, potential to treat some human disease. Where I really got a chance to explore that and also really develop my senses of identity that I started to develop at Yale, to be honest. And so, I think Aydah mentioned, starting to do things outside of the research realm of Caltech. And I think for me, that was also equally true. I got a chance to really start to develop a sense of, I guess, balance between research and celebrating who I am and pursuing those interests. And so I became really involved with reviving and really establishing the LGBT group on campus at Caltech, which was really a rewarding experience. And so, coming out of grad school, keeping an eye on the time here, I did a postdoc, and so I went up to Stanford University to do some research in chemical biology, trying something a little bit different, applying some of the compounds that I developed or made in grad school, and thinking more broadly about how they can be used to study some sort of biological function. So I went up there and spent 3 or 4 years, almost 4 years as a postdoc. Also happy to unpack that experience. At each of these transitions, I think we all, you get thrown for a loop in what you're doing, and each one of these, I think, was super challenging for me in a lot of ways. And really, what it came down to for me was just starting to develop a sense of community, right? I think Aydah mentioned, or I forget who else mentioned, right? As you go up, as you climb beyond, right, undergrad, your community starts to get noticeably smaller, like almost exponentially smaller as you climb each rank. And so it becomes a lot more important to make sure you establish those connections, to make sure you recognize that you're not doing this alone, that you're not kind of swimming in your head by yourself, which I often find myself doing, right? Navigating imposter syndrome is one of those things that is very challenging and never really leaves you. And so it's good to develop good techniques, including reaching out to people. And so now I get a chance to, do a little bit of research. I'm at a liberal arts institution, and so we're really focused on teaching. I get to do a lot of teaching and really think about really creative ways to deliver classes like organic chemistry. I have a group of undergraduate researchers, and so that's been really rewarding. Something I got to do at Yale was STARS 1, STARS 2. I did all of the STARS things basically since the end of my freshman year. I got a chance to be a facilitator and tutor people, and that's something that I think really inspired me to keep doing that sort of kind of work today. And then I guess one last thing in terms of advice I think to give to the younger students is I would say to make sure you let yourself take opportunities, right? So it's one thing to take an opportunity and people tell you that, but it's a whole nother to be in a mindset where you can say, like, I can do that. And I think I struggled a lot with that as an undergrad, always kind of second guessing myself and not being sure that's not really for me, right? Kind of shutting it down before I even consider it. And so that's sort of one, I think, mental barrier that I took a lot of time to overcome. And so I think you have a lot of opportunities while you're at Yale. And I think it's just important to make sure that you put yourself in a position where you can say, yes, I can try that. And yes, I can do it as well. I'm looking forward to chatting with all of you in the breakout sessions in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahul. Our next speaker is Akpanoluo Ete, a data scientist and CEO.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sandy. By the way, I've been messaging Dean George, and she says to say hi. She also says to give a hug to Clarence. Yes, once again, my name is Akpanoluo. I am a data scientist who works as analytics lead at music tech startup Bandcamp, which helps support artists musicians in actually making money for their music online in comparison to Spotify, but we'll not get into that. And I'm also the CEO and chief curator of a music community that I founded 4 years ago called Sound Shop, which is effectively a TED Talk meets a concert. Musicians talk about their music, and they perform their music and then have an intellectual conversation with the audience. So in terms of what I want to talk to you guys about, I would say that the important thing that I want to impart on you is two things, actually. The first is that you should pursue your intellectual curiosity wherever that leads, even if it leads you away from what you perceived to be your path. And the other thing would be that even if you do go far afield from what you expected your path to be, that the time that you spent prior is not wasted, and that actually, you bring all of it with you, and you're actually able to, reorient those skills in powerful ways in new environments. So I just wanted to kind of like kick this off metaphorically with this painting that I painted. This was I painted this in high school. My senior year of high school. So my mom's a painter, and she's also an art professor and art historian. And she also encouraged me to go into the sciences, like at the exclusion of the arts. So there's this kind of like constant dichotomy in me around the arts versus the sciences. And in conjunction with that, when I started at Yale, I was deciding between psychology, I knew that I wanted to do neuroscience, but I was trying to decide between whether I wanted to be on the more bio side of things or the psych side of things. And so being able to, spend a summer in a neurobiology lab up at KBT was very influential in sort of helping me realize that, I wanted to go more on the psych side of things rather than the biology side of things. But, as I continued down that path, I was thinking of becoming a doctor. And in the end, I decided that that was not what I wanted. And I realized ultimately it was what my mom had wanted me to do. And there's really no compromising between what you want to do and what your parents want you to do. And I tried to convince myself otherwise. But, right before I graduated, I called my mom and was like, hey, I don't want to become a doctor. She's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to go into advertising. And my mom was like, what? I decided to go that direction because I basically saw that I figured that my background in neuroscience and psychology would be useful for advertising. To the degree that that's true in an entry level position in advertising, not really necessarily the case. But my interest in STEM, and especially the technology side of things, always saw me doing things that were more technical in any role that I was in, and also the presentation skills that I gained through STARS and cultivated through my research background also proved hugely instrumental in my journey. And so, as time moved along, as I moved up in the advertising world, I became more and more technical. So becoming a data analyst, becoming then a data engineer, and ultimately a data scientist. And all of that I owe to, the STEM background that I have. And then along the way, mentorship has always been important to me, both within STEM, both within STARS, and then, throughout my time as an undergrad. And so as I've sort of moved up in the world, I have been mentoring people. I've taken people who work in the advertising business and they're more client facing and they're less technical, and I kind of mentor them into becoming technical. So I've been able to have, a huge impact on the people around me. And so, I kind of had this narrative in myself as I was moving up the ranks that all this stuff that I did before, was not really useful. And why did I spend all that time doing pre-med stuff? But I think me being invited back to this has actually made me reflect on how it's actually persisted with me, which is really cool. And then I know I'm over time, and I actually timed myself so that I wouldn't. But the final thing is, my music community. You think like, you're doing this music curation thing. Like, how does that relate to your past background? And for the longest time, it didn't really relate, or at least I didn't see it as relating. But I met this guy named Kyle Mengelkamp, who is a stroke survivor. He had a massive stroke at age 11, complete retrograde amnesia, had to rehabilitate himself from scratch, and now he's 20 years on from that stroke, and he runs a brain community where he brings together academics and survivors of traumatic brain injuries, and they're all talking about the brain. They're all mutually supporting each other. And so he and I now do a lot of collaborative events around music and the brain, and it's kind of like the book Musicophilia as like an event. So we'll bring together clinical psychologists who run an institution around music at Berkeley School of Music, or we'll bring in a psych academic who's doing research on music, or practitioners at the intersection of music and the brain. And in one of those events, I actually gave a talk where I basically articulated my theory that music is the baseline skill upon which language is built. And I supported that using evidence from linguistics, neuroscience, evolutionary biology, clinical psychology. And so I'm now in a place where I'm able to bring the STEM background into what once seemed like a more sort of fully arts oriented sort of thing. So back to bringing it all full circle, you can have it all. You can make the arts and the sciences live together. And so that's what I just want to convey to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akano Luo. Now, next speaker is Tina Liu, a research specialist at UC Berkeley. Tina?
Hi, so first of all, thanks for inviting me in. It's great to see all these alums doing all these amazing things at this point, at all different sort of stages of their career. So thanks a lot for this opportunity to come and join this event today. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about kind of my journey at Yale, actually, and also a bit after, mainly focusing on one particular recent kind of work that I've been doing on RNA diagnostics related to COVID, but I'll also give sort of just short vignettes of some of the past work that I've also done before. So as Sandy was saying, I'm currently a research specialist in the data lab, where I actually just was a postdoc until very, very recently. I was class of 2008 in the STARS 2 program in Lynn Regan's lab in MBMB. And I think one sort of, this event really made me think about what sort of is the common theme that connects my past work, because I've worked on several different areas. I really think that one thing that drives my sort of interest in research is really understanding life at the molecular level. So, obviously a whole multicellular organism is composed of cells that then, if you zoom in more, has these complex intracellular structures called organelles, and that when you further break that down into macromolecules, which include proteins, sugars, DNA, RNA, lipids, that all kind of enable life to exist, which is just kind of an amazing thought to me. And so I worked in a couple of different areas. One is engineering proteins, which are one type of macromolecule, looking at membrane proteins, so the connection between proteins and lipids, so two different types of molecules. And then more recently, harnessing a type of proteins called CRISPR-Cas nucleases for RNA detection. So again, looking at two different interactions between two different types of macromolecules and harnessing them for different functions outside of their endogenous function. And so at Yale, what I was doing in the STARS 2 program, I was in Lynn Regan's lab. So she's since left Yale. She's now at University of Edinburgh, but she was a professor in the MB&B department. And she gave me this project to try to design new proteins based on this TPR protein, which is a natural protein, but we wanted to give it new properties so that it could bind to a novel target or any target that you want. And one of the examples or the value of doing that is that you can use those design proteins here to target any pathway in a cell. So in this case, the design protein that I was actually a part of designing and engineering, we could put into yeast cells, and we could actually inhibit the specific pathway that was the protein that it bound was part of. And so that actually led to my first, co-first author paper from the STARS program was the work that I did in Lynn's lab, which is, super exciting as an undergrad. It's not something that I expected at the time, but it was amazing to just have that continuous support from STARS to start a research project, in my second semester freshman year, and actually get it to the point where we could actually present it and share it with the scientific community. So that was really, really amazing experience starting off. Then after Yale, I went to Harvard in the BBS program, Biological and Biomedical Sciences, where I really wanted to still work on molecular interactions and events, but understand how they happened in the context of cellular pathways. And so I joined Tom Rappaport's lab that worked on how organelles in the cell are shaped and how the proteins, so this particular family of proteins called elastin proteins, how they interact with each other and also with the membrane to fuse membranes together. And that it turns out to be a key sort of event in the formation of organelles, which, as many of you might have already know, are sort of the internal compartments or rooms of a cell. If you think of a cell as a building, and the kitchen having a specialized function, the bedroom, the living room, and so on. So the organelles are kind of have those compartmentalized functions inside the cell. And then after this, I went to Jennifer Doudna's lab at UC Berkeley, where and her lab works on CRISPR-Cas systems, which are actually bacterial immune systems. And these immune systems use these protein RNA complexes called RNA-guided nucleases that protect them against invading viruses. And one sort of key step, again, if we look down at the molecular level, is that this immune pathway requires the use of these protein RNA effectors to really enact immunity, essentially. And so, as some of you might have heard before, many of these types of nucleases can be harnessed for DNA or RNA editing in cells. So this is, a wide sort of ranging of the applications that are already kind of in use. So there's genome editing, there's imaging of DNA inside cells, activating or repressing certain genes, as well as RNA imaging and editing and knockdown. And it's one of the kind of value of CRISPR-Cas is that it's not that it's the first time that DNA editing has been achieved, but it's a tool that's really easy for people to use. So it really democratizes genome manipulation in biology. But the thing that I ended up working on actually this past year, given that the pandemic started last spring or early last year, a lot of labs on campus really tried to think about what we could do to help. And one sort of area of need was, of course, testing. And so a couple labs in our building actually got together and really just brainstormed lots of ideas to figure out how can we use CRISPR for RNA diagnostics. This concept of using a CRISPR protein to detect certain RNA sequences isn't new, but the problem was that previous approaches, even though they worked, they still needed higher sensitivity and also higher speed for them to be really relevant and useful in clinical applications. And so we came up with this idea to try to more efficiently couple together two different CRISPR proteins in tandem for really fast RNA detection. So essentially it takes a system that were kind of separate systems before on their own, but combine them together to see if we could get a faster response. And this is one example of kind of the signal that comes out. So basically we're looking for something that rises as you over time. And so we had to make a couple modifications with this system to actually get it working well. So you can see on the left, this is a perfect example actually of, many people earlier speaking was saying, sometimes things don't work. And you can see here on the left, we've tested multiple sort of concentrations of the molecule that we want to detect, and we don't get very good signal. But we found that actually by really looking at the function of this one protein, that we could engineer its activator by putting this kind of pink modification here to make it work better. And essentially by just introducing that single change, you can see the difference in signal here from almost close to baseline to this really robust response. And that actually increased our sensitivity by 100-fold. And so we're just really exciting to see this as kind of, these moments in science where a lot of times things don't work the first time and second time and third time, but then when they do work that one time, it's just a really incredible feeling. And so we were able ultimately to sort of, in addition, incorporate other improvements to get to a sensitivity that was sort of clinically useful, which is attomolar concentration rate. That's about 30 copies per microliter of SARS-CoV-2 RNA in about 20 minutes. And in addition, since we have an on-campus sort of testing lab, we're able to actually take some samples that were left over from their lab and see if we could use our assay to detect SARS-CoV-2 RNA that were actually from patient samples. And what you can see here, so I won't go into too much detail, but this black line is essentially, we're looking for a difference between this black line and the pink line. And you can see here that you can see this above the pink line, which means that it's positive. And again, for here, this is actually with a lower viral load. So this number means that there's less viral particles there, or viral RNA there. And it's still above, but it's closer to the baseline. On the other hand, though, negative samples all show that it was below this pink baseline here. So essentially, we could distinguish between positive and negative samples at this range of CT values between 8 and 29, which correspond to sort of the early infectious stages of COVID-19. And that's really nice for us because essentially when you want to control a pandemic, it's not necessarily you have to have the absolute most sensitive test in the world. Actually, what's more important in some cases is being able to frequently test and catch people at the most infectious stages when they're most likely to spread it to other people. And so it's really nice for us to see that in this range between less than 29, where most positives in this kind of group were, we were able to detect them with this technology that we had developed. And so just to kind of conclude, basically we found that these unrelated CRISPR nucleases that were from different sort of bacteria, different biological systems could be really combined together for fast and sensitive RNA detection. That makes it, that simplicity also of being this kind of a single reaction makes it really amenable for rapid testing, which is often referred to as point of care diagnosis, compared to, for example, traditional approaches which require centralized lab, a lot of equipment, trained personnel. And I think just to end with, I think again, this sort of goes toward the point that if you have an understanding of how the molecules work to drive a process in life, that can really lead to innovations that are valuable in biology research and medicine. That's not just true for this, but also you can see in my mentor Jennifer Doudna's work on CRISPR that CRISPR is a natural bacterial system. Nobody ever thought it was not designed for genome editing, but nowadays it's been widely adopted for genome manipulation. And so I think I have to end by really thanking the MB&B program for really sort of instilling that appreciation for molecular events, and also STARS 2 for their support, and of course, mentors Lynn Regan, Jennifer Doudna, and Tom Rappaport, and also the great Doudna Lab for their help. I'm happy to talk more at the breakout sessions.
Thank you very much, Tina. Our last alumni speaker today is Elias Curano. He's a current MD PhD student at Yale Medical School and my STARS 1 graduate coordinator. Elias?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Elias. I'm, as Dean Chang mentioned, currently an MD PhD student at Yale, but graduated from Yale a long time ago in 2012. And, I've been really fortunate to be part of the STARS program. I remember my first day at Yale just feeling completely out of place. So I'm from a small town in Florida, Hialeah, Florida. It's a really small city in Miami. And growing up just like, in a Spanish speaking community with Spanish speaking parents, I never felt out of place. I always felt like I was home. And when I got to Yale, that feeling of belonging was immediately swept away from me, and I immediately fell out of place. And I think many of you here probably share with some of that feeling. And I remember, even the smallest things, it made me feel like a foreigner. So one big thing in Florida is wearing these silk shirts, these guayaberas. And I remember wearing one probably my first week at Yale. And, one of my floor mates made, some sort of joke about my shirt. And I just remember immediately feeling like it didn't belong here. And I think, early grades, my first C at Yale, compounded that feeling of not belonging at Yale, feeling like I didn't belong. And really, that first year felt really lost. And I think serving currently as the graduate student coordinator for STARS 1, many students feel this way. And it really doesn't matter what your background is or where you're from. And it's really hard to feel like you belong here, especially if, you're from a underrepresented community or a first generation college student. It's really easy to feel lost and feel like you don't have a community here at Yale. But I remember my sophomore year, I interacted with Dean Garcia at La Casa. And she really pointed me to the STARS program and really pointed me to people who made me feel like I did belong at Yale. And she was one of the first people who really introduced me to the program and introduced me to the faculty members that were part of STARS that had sort of voluntarily chosen to mentor students like myself, which was really remarkable to me at the time. And I think, like many of you have mentioned, Dr. Black was just an absolute force. I mean, you could sort of be failing and messing up and not be on time for something, and she was after you. She was pushing you. She was asking you why you weren't showing up to review sessions. I remember one time, at the time when I was a student, she was hosting these nightly review sessions for chemistry, and I think I missed it once. And she's like, "Why aren't you here? You're the student who belongs here the most. You need the most help." And it was that level of intensity and that level of sort of looking out for students and chasing students down that I think is really, really remarkable and really made Dr. Black stand out among all of the faculty members here. She really chased after you. And the same was true for Dr. Moreno. So, I ended up doing STARS Summer. And Dr. Moreno had a similar energy and a similar force, but she really taught me how to succeed in science and how to succeed in STEM, and that to me was a really, really remarkable. Just having someone who was so accomplished in her own field, in her own right, take the time to mentor me and shepherd me and just teach me what I needed to know from how to write an email that was appropriate to a professor, to how to design a slide that didn't look like the example we saw a little bit earlier. And I know we all make jokes about that, but it's true. I mean, the number one thing you're doing as a graduate student or someone in STEM or in any field is communicating, and being able to communicate effectively and clearly is just so invaluable. And it's a bit of a softer skill, but one that I really credit STARS with. I think STARS for me was really the first time that, not only was I taught how to succeed, but I was also taught to never give up. I think deep down inside, I always knew I wanted to pursue STEM. I didn't have parents that were scientists or went to college for that matter. But, the STARS faculty members really taught me to kind of pursue that and never give up on that and really seek mentors that could help me along the way. And that was extremely invaluable for me. So since that time as a STARS student, I ended up doing STARS Summer as well as STARS 2. One thing I'll mention that someone actually said a little earlier today is that in addition to the mentorship, one key piece of the STARS program was the financial support that I received. So at the time when I was doing STARS 1 and STARS 2, I had the opportunity to go to multiple conferences and present multiple posters and talks. And it was because the STARS program paid for my lodging and paid for my registration. I mean, there was absolutely no way I was going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities if STARS wasn't financing those opportunities for me. And that was really, really invaluable. Even with STARS 2, the opportunity to get paid to do research to both further your intellectual development and your research skills, while also generating the income that perhaps you need because you're sending money home, or you're paying for your own books, or paying for your own day-to-day expenses. It's really something that I sort of look back, and I think many of us feel the same way. I really credit STARS with sort of saving me in many ways and putting me on the right track. But since that time, I went on to start an MD PhD program at Yale, thankfully, to most of my STARS mentors, including Dean Chang, and have recently started my own biotech and just closed our Series A. So, I say that not to really brag, but just to say that, I went from getting C's in chemistry and, virtually failing out of a university to now achieving some level of success. And it really wasn't something I did on my own. It was really something I did because of STARS and through the support I received from STARS. So, I'm just really grateful to the students I've been able to mentor through STARS, but especially to the individuals who have mentored me. I mean, it's really been an invaluable process and experience for myself. And, I'm just really grateful to be here with you all and to see that so many people benefited from this program and decided to give back by being here today. So thank you all. And thank you, Dean Chang, for organizing all of this and putting us all together.
Thank you very much, Elias. And thank you to all the speakers in the morning session.